The dust from Charles Vandermeer's wagon hadn't even settled on the horizon when Florence realized she was standing in the doorway of an empty house with nothing but the clothes on her back and a deed to a ranch she didn't know how to run. Her husband of 23 years had packed his belongings at dawn, kissed his 20-year-old mistress on the mouth right there in the yard for Florence to see, and driven away without a single word of goodbye. Florence was 42 years old, and in that moment, she felt every single year weighing on her shoulders like stones. Jackson, Wyoming, in the spring of 1884 was a town that didn't waste time on sympathy. The mountains still held snow on their peaks, and the valley was just beginning to green up after a long winter. Florence stood on the porch of the ranch house watching the other wagons roll past on the dirt road, their occupants pointedly looking away. Everyone had known about Charles and the girl, a blonde thing named Melody who worked at the general store. Everyone had known except Florence, or maybe she had known, but hadn't wanted to believe it. The signs had been there for months. The late nights, the new cologne, the way he couldn't meet her eyes across the dinner table. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked back into the house. The silence was oppressive. Their daughter had married and moved to California 3 years ago, and their son had died of fever when he was just 8 years old. That loss had been the first crack in their marriage, though Florence hadn't recognized it at the time. Charles had thrown himself into work and she had thrown herself into survival. They had stopped talking about anything that mattered. They had stopped touching. They had become two strangers sharing a roof. And somewhere along the way, Charles had decided that starting over with a younger woman was easier than repairing what they had broken together. Florence walked through the house, taking inventory. Charles had left her the ranch, but he had taken most of the money from their accounts. There were 3 horses in the barn, a dozen cattle, some chickens, and a pig. The garden plot needed tending, and the fences needed mending. The roof had a leak in the back bedroom. She had enough supplies to last maybe 2 weeks if she was careful. After that, she would need to figure out how to make money, how to keep the ranch running, how to survive alone in a place that had no use for a woman her age without a man to speak for her. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. For the first time since Charles left, she let herself cry. The tears came hot and fast, tears of rage and humiliation and grief. She had given that man the best years of her life. She had borne his children, cooked his meals, mended his clothes, shared his bed, and supported his dreams. She had been a good wife by every measure she knew, and it hadn't been enough. She hadn't been young enough, pretty enough, exciting enough. She had been discarded like a worn-out pair of boots replaced with a newer model. But even as she cried, something else was building inside her. Anger, yes, but also determination. She wasn't going to lie down and die just because Charles Vandermeer had decided she wasn't worth his time anymore. She had survived childbirth, infant death, harsh winters, and lean years. She would survive this too. She would figure out how to run this ranch, and she would make it work. And someday Charles would hear about how well she was doing and regret every choice that had led him away from her. Florence wiped her eyes, stood up, and went to change into her work dress. If she was going to save this ranch, she needed to start now. The first week was brutal. Florence had helped with ranch work over the years, but Charles had always handled the heavy lifting and the decision-making. Now she was trying to remember everything she had seen him do, trying to figure out which cattle needed to be moved where, which fence posts were rotting and needed replacement, how much feed the horses required. Her hands blistered and bled. Her back ached constantly. She fell into bed each night too exhausted to even dream. On the 8th day, one of the horses got spooked and kicked through a stall door. Florence stared at the splintered wood and felt her carefully constructed determination start to crumble. She didn't have money to hire someone to fix it, and she wasn't sure she had the skill to do it herself. She was standing there, fighting back tears, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She looked up to see a man riding toward her on a paint horse. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and a weathered face that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. He wore a typical cowboy outfit, worn jeans, a blue shirt, a leather vest, and a hat that had seen better days. As he got closer, Florence could see that his eyes were a striking pale gray like storm clouds. He tipped his hat to her. "Madam, name's Samuel Irving. I own the spread about 5 miles west of here. Heard you might could use some help." Florence straightened her spine, defensive. "I'm managing just fine, thank you." Samuel looked at the broken stall door, then back at her. His expression was neutral, but there was something kind in his eyes. "Yes, madam, I can see that. But I was heading into town anyway, and I thought I might stop by the lumber yard, pick up some boards. If you happen to need any, I could bring them out here. Save you a trip." Florence wanted to refuse. She wanted to prove that she could handle everything on her own, but practicality won over pride. "How much would you want for the delivery?" "No charge. Neighbors help neighbors. That's how it works out here." She studied him suspiciously. In her experience, men didn't do favors without expecting something in return. "What's the catch?" Samuel shifted in his saddle. "No catch. I just figure you've had a hard time of it lately, and a little help wouldn't go amiss. But if it makes you uncomfortable, I'll be on my way." He started to turn his horse, and Florence heard herself say, "Wait." He stopped and looked back at her. She took a breath. "I would appreciate the boards. Thank you. How much do I owe you for the lumber?" "We can settle up later. I'll be back this afternoon." He rode off before she could argue. Florence watched him go, feeling off balance. She didn't know what to make of Samuel Irving. He seemed genuine, but she had thought Charles was genuine too once upon a time. She wasn't sure she could trust her own judgment anymore. True to his word, Samuel returned that afternoon with a wagon full of lumber. He unloaded it near the barn, then surprised Florence by pulling out a hammer and nails. "Thought I'd help you get that stall door fixed before I head back. Getting dark earlier these days, and you don't want that horse getting out." "I can't pay you for your time," Florence said stiffly. "Didn't ask you to." Samuel walked into the barn and started examining the damage. Florence followed, torn between gratitude and irritation. She watched as he measured the opening and began cutting boards to size. His movements were efficient and practiced. "You do this often? Fix things for strangers?" "You're not a stranger. You're my neighbor. And yeah, I help out when I can. Somebody helped me when I was getting started, so I figure I should pass it along." "That's very noble of you." He glanced at her, and she saw a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You don't believe me." "I don't know you well enough to believe or disbelieve you." "That's fair." He went back to work, and for a few minutes, the only sound was the hammer striking nails. Then he said, "Your husband was a fool." Florence froze. "Excuse me?" Samuel didn't look up from his work. "Leaving you for that girl. He was a fool. He left the better half behind." The words hit Florence like a physical blow. She didn't know whether to be offended or touched. "You don't know anything about our marriage." "Don't need to. I know you've been out here working yourself to the bone trying to keep this place running. I know you haven't asked anyone for help even though you clearly need it. I know you've got more strength and dignity in your little finger than most people have in their whole body. So yeah, your husband was a fool." Florence felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. No one had said anything kind to her since Charles left. Everyone had either ignored her or looked at her with pity. But Samuel Irving was looking at her with respect, and it made something inside her chest crack open. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and kept working. By the time the sun was setting, the stall door was repaired and sturdy. Samuel gathered his tools and loaded them back into his wagon. "I'll stop by in a few days, see if you need anything else." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to, I want to." He climbed into his wagon and tipped his hat again. "Good evening, Mrs. Vandermeer." "Florence," she said impulsively. "You can call me Florence." He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "Good evening, Florence. I'm Samuel." After he left, Florence went back into the house and made herself a simple dinner. As she ate, she replayed the conversation in her mind. He left the better half behind. She didn't know if that was true, but it felt good to hear it. It felt good to be seen as something other than a discarded wife. Samuel came back 3 days later with wire for mending fences. Florence protested, but he waved her off. Had extra, thought you could use it. They worked together that afternoon, walking the property line and fixing the places where the wire had come loose or broken. Samuel talked as they worked, telling her about his own ranch, about the cattle market, about the challenges of running a spread in Wyoming. Florence found herself relaxing around him, enjoying the conversation. It had been so long since anyone had talked to her like an equal, like someone worth listening to. How long have you been ranching? She asked as they stretched wire between posts. About 10 years. Came out here from Missouri after the war. Wanted to start fresh, you know. Built the ranch from nothing. It's not much, but it's mine. Were you in the war? Yeah. Union side. Saw things I'd rather forget. He secured the wire and moved to the next post. That's part of why I came out here. Wanted to get as far from those memories as I could. Florence understood that. My brother fought for the Union too. He didn't make it home. I'm sorry. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Then Samuel said, Can I ask you something? All right. What are you going to do? Long term, I mean. It's hard to run a ranch alone. Florence had been asking herself the same question. I don't know yet. I'm taking it one day at a time, but I'm not giving up. This ranch is all I have left. I'm going to make it work somehow. Samuel nodded slowly. If you ever want to sell some of your cattle, I know a buyer in town who gives fair prices. And if you need help with the branding or the roundup, I've got a couple of hands who could spare a day or two. Why are you doing this? Florence asked suddenly. Why are you helping me? Samuel stopped working and looked at her directly. Because you remind me of my mother. She was left alone when my father died, had to raise 5 kids by herself, worked harder than any person I've ever known. She never asked for help, but when people offered, she had the sense to take it. That's what I'm offering you. Florence, help. No strings attached, just one neighbor to another. Florence felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. Thank you, Samuel, truly. He smiled that transformative smile again. You're welcome. Over the next few weeks, Samuel became a regular presence on Florence's ranch. He never stayed long, and he never overstepped, but he always seemed to show up right when she needed help with something. He helped her move the cattle to fresh grazing. He fixed the leak in her roof. He taught her how to properly shoe a horse, and slowly, gradually, Florence began to feel less like she was drowning and more like she might actually survive this. She also began to notice things about Samuel that had nothing to do with his helpfulness. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the sound of his laugh, warm and genuine, the strength in his hands as he worked, the kindness in his voice when he spoke to her. She tried to push those thoughts away. She was still married, technically, even if Charles had abandoned her. And she was too old to be having these kinds of feelings, wasn't she? But the feelings persisted, growing stronger every time Samuel visited. Florence found herself looking forward to his arrivals, found herself disappointed when several days passed without seeing him. She started taking more care with her appearance, brushing her hair and pinning it neatly, wearing her better dresses. She told herself she was just taking pride in herself again, but deep down she knew the truth. One evening in late June, Samuel arrived with a basket. My housekeeper made too much supper, he said. Thought you might like some. Florence invited him in, and they ate together at her kitchen table. The food was delicious, roasted chicken and potatoes and fresh bread. They talked and laughed, and Florence realized with a start that she was happy. For the first time since Charles left, she was genuinely happy. After dinner, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. Samuel sat in the chair next to hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. This is my favorite time of day, Florence said softly, when everything gets quiet and peaceful. Mine too, Samuel agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Florence, can I be honest with you about something? Her heart started to beat faster. Of course. I didn't just happen to hear you needed help. I sought out the information. After your husband left, I asked around town about how you were doing. I wanted to know if you were all right." Florence turned to look at him. "Why?" Samuel met her gaze steadily. "Because I've been watching you for months, even before your husband left. I used to see you in town sometimes, and I always thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Not just pretty, but beautiful in a way that goes deeper than looks. You had this grace about you, this kindness. And then when I heard what happened, I was angry. Angry that any man could be stupid enough to throw away a woman like you." Florence's breath caught. "Samuel, I'm still married." "I know. And I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I'm just telling you the truth. I care about you. Florence, more than I should probably, but I needed you to know." She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to tell him to leave, to protect herself from more heartbreak. But a larger part of her wanted to lean into this feeling, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a second chance at happiness. "I don't know what to do with this," she said finally. "I don't know how to be anything other than Charles's wife. That's who I've been for more than 20 years. You don't have to be anything right now. Just think about it. And know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." He stood and walked down the porch steps. Florence watched him mount his horse, her heart in her throat. "Samuel?" He looked back at her. "Thank you for telling me. And for the record, I think you're pretty special too." His smile was like sunshine. "Good night, Florence." "Good night." After he left, Florence sat on the porch for a long time thinking. Her marriage to Charles was over in every way that mattered. He had betrayed her, abandoned her, chosen someone else. Did she owe him loyalty after that? Did she owe herself a chance to be happy again? The next morning, Florence rode into town. She had been avoiding it since Charles left, not wanting to face the gossip and the pitying looks. But she had business to attend to. She went to the lawyer's office and filed for divorce. In Wyoming territory, she had grounds for abandonment and adultery. The lawyer, a sympathetic man named George Patterson, assured her that the divorce would be granted without issue. "It's good to see you taking charge of your life, Mrs. Vandermeer," he said. "That takes courage." "It doesn't feel courageous," Florence admitted. "It feels terrifying." "That's how you know it's the right thing to do." With the divorce papers filed, Florence felt like she could breathe a little easier. She was taking control of her own future for the first time in her adult life. It was scary, but it was also exhilarating. She stopped by the general store to buy supplies. Melody wasn't there, thank God. The owner, Mrs. Henderson, greeted her warmly. "Florence, it's good to see you. How are you managing out at the ranch?" "Better than expected, actually. I'm figuring it out." "That's wonderful. You know, if you ever need extra work, I could use someone to help with bookkeeping a few days a week. You always had a good head for numbers." Florence was surprised by the offer. "I'd like that. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson." "Call me Ruth, and you're welcome, dear." As Florence left the store, she ran into Samuel coming out of the feed and supply shop. His face lit up when he saw her. "Florence, what brings you to town?" "Business," she said with a small smile. "I filed for divorce this morning." Something intense flashed in Samuel's eyes. "How do you feel about that?" "Scared, relieved, free, all at once." "That sounds about right." He hesitated, then said, "Would you let me buy you lunch? There's a nice little restaurant by the hotel, nothing fancy, but the food's good." Florence knew that being seen with Samuel would start talk, but she found she didn't care. "I'd like that." They walked to the restaurant together, and Florence was acutely aware of the eyes watching them, the whispers following in their wake. But when she sat across from Samuel at a small table by the window and saw the way he looked at her, like she was precious and valuable, all the gossip faded to insignificance. They talked over lunch about everything and nothing. Samuel told her about a book he was reading, a collection of Mark Twain stories. Florence told him about her daughter's letters from California, about the grandchild she had never met. They discussed politics and weather and the best way to make apple pie. It was easy and comfortable and felt completely natural. As they were finishing their meal, Samuel reached across the table and covered her hand with his. I'm glad you're here, Florence. I'm glad you're taking steps to move forward. I'm glad too, she said softly. I'm glad you've been patient with me. I'd wait as long as it takes. Over the summer, Florence and Samuel grew closer. He continued to help her with the ranch, but now their time together included long conversations, shared meals, and quiet moments just enjoying each other's company. Florence learned that Samuel was 45 years old, had never been married, and had a sharp sense of humor that made her laugh until her sides hurt. He was patient and kind and solid in a way that Charles had never been. In August, Florence's divorce was finalized. She was officially no longer Mrs. Charles Vandermeer. She went home that day and burned all the letters Charles had ever written her, watching the smoke carry away the last vestiges of that chapter of her life. Samuel came by that evening and found her sitting by the fire pit, watching the embers die. He sat down next to her without a word, just offering his presence. Finally, Florence said, "It's done. I'm free." "How does it feel?" "Like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, like I could either fall or fly." Samuel took her hand. "Then let's fly together." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Florence felt something she hadn't felt in years: desire, hope, love. She kissed him back, pouring all her emotion into it, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "I love you, Florence Vandermeer," Samuel said. "I know it might be too soon to say it, but I do. I love your strength and your grace and your stubborn determination. I love the way you laugh and the way you think. I love everything about you." Florence touched his face, tracing the lines around his eyes. "I love you too, Samuel Irving. You made me believe I could be more than just a discarded wife. You made me believe I was worth something. You're worth everything." They kissed again, and this time it was deeper, more passionate. When Samuel pulled back, his eyes were dark with want. "Florence, I don't want to rush you, but I want you to know that I'm serious about this, about us. When you're ready, I want to marry you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to build a life with you." "I want that too," Florence whispered, "but I need some time. I need to be just me for a little while, not someone's wife. I need to figure out who Florence is when she's alone." "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." True to his word, Samuel gave her space but remained a constant presence in her life. They continued to see each other regularly, but Florence focused on establishing her independence. She took the bookkeeping job with Ruth Henderson and discovered she had a talent for business. She started attending town council meetings and became involved in community affairs. She made friends with other women in town, building a support network that wasn't dependent on a husband's status. The ranch thrived under her care. With Samuel's guidance and her own growing expertise, Florence increased her cattle herd and improved her property. She hired a young ranch hand named Tommy to help with the heavy work, and she negotiated fair prices for her beef at market. By autumn, she was not just surviving, but thriving. One crisp October evening, Samuel came to dinner. Florence had spent the afternoon making his favorite meal, pot roast with vegetables and fresh biscuits. They ate and talked and laughed, and afterward they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets against the chill. "Samuel, I've been thinking," Florence said, "about what you said, about marriage." He turned to her, his expression carefully neutral. "Yes?" "I'm ready. I know who I am now. I'm strong and capable and worthy of love. I don't need a man to complete me or define me, but I want you in my life not because I need you, but because I choose you, because you make my life better and richer and happier. So yes, Samuel Irving, I'll marry you." Samuel's face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He pulled her close and kissed her soundly. "You've just made me the happiest man in Wyoming." They were married in November in a small ceremony at the church in Jackson. Florence wore a simple cream-colored dress and Samuel wore his best suit. Ruth Henderson stood up as Florence's witness, and Samuel's foreman stood up for him. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Florence felt like she was finally, truly home. They combined their ranches, creating one of the larger spreads in the valley. Samuel moved into Florence's house, and they spent the winter making it their own, putting their shared stamp on every room. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, discovering the joy of physical intimacy with someone who truly loved and respected them. In the spring of 1885, Florence discovered she was pregnant. At 43, she had thought her childbearing years were behind her, but apparently life had other plans. She was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. Samuel was over the moon with joy. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to have a baby." The pregnancy was harder than Florence's previous ones had been. She was older now and her body struggled with the changes. But Samuel was attentive and caring, taking over more of the ranch work and making sure Florence rested. Ruth Henderson stopped by regularly with food and advice, and the other women in town rallied around her with support. In December, Florence gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Samuel Irving, and he had his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. Samuel cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed with love and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered to Florence. "Thank you for giving me this gift, this family. I never thought I'd have it." "Thank you for giving me a second chance," Florence replied. "Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible." They settled into the rhythms of parenthood, exhausted but happy. Thomas was a good baby, curious and alert, and he brought such joy to their lives. Florence had been worried that she wouldn't have the energy to raise another child at her age, but she found that love gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. In the spring of 1886, Florence received a letter from her daughter Margaret in California. She was coming for a visit and bringing Florence's 3-year-old grandson, William. Florence was thrilled. She hadn't seen Margaret in years, and they had so much to catch up on. When Margaret arrived in late May, Florence hardly recognized her. The girl she remembered had become a confident, beautiful woman. Margaret took one look at the ranch, at Samuel, at baby Thomas, and burst into tears. "Mama, I was so worried about you," she said. "When I heard about Papa leaving, I wanted to come right away, but Robert was sick and I couldn't leave. I felt terrible that you were going through that alone." "I wasn't alone for long," Florence said, smiling at Samuel. "I found something better." Margaret stayed for 2 weeks, and it was wonderful. She and Samuel hit it off immediately, and she spent hours playing with Thomas and teaching William about ranch life. One evening after the children were asleep, Margaret and Florence sat on the porch together. "I'm so happy for you, Mama," Margaret said. "You deserve this. You deserve to be loved the way Samuel loves you." "Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot to me." "Can I tell you something? I never liked Papa very much. I know I shouldn't say that, but it's true. He was always so cold, so distant. He never looked at you the way Samuel does, like you're the sun and the moon and all the stars combined." Florence felt tears sting her eyes. "Your father loved me in his way. It just wasn't enough." "Well, Samuel's love is enough. I can see it all over your face. You're glowing, Mama. You're happy." "I am. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm truly, deeply happy." After Margaret left, life continued its steady, peaceful pace. The ranch prospered. Thomas grew into a lively, mischievous toddler who adored his father and kept both his parents on their toes. Florence continued her bookkeeping work and became a respected member of the community. Samuel's reputation as a fair, honest rancher grew, and other ranchers often came to him for advice. In the summer of 1887, Florence was at the general store when she saw Charles Vandermeer for the first time since he'd left. He looked older, smaller somehow, his face drawn and tired. Melody was nowhere in sight. Florence felt her stomach clench, but she held her head high and walked past him without acknowledgement. "Florence, wait," he called out. She stopped but didn't turn around. She heard his footsteps approaching. "Please, can we talk?" She turned slowly. "What do you want, Charles?" He looked uncomfortable. "I just wanted to see how you were doing. I heard you remarried." "Yes, I did. I'm very happy." "That's good. That's really good." He shifted his weight. Listen, I wanted to say I'm sorry for how things ended, for how I treated you. It was wrong. Florence studied him. He looked sincere, but she felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no lingering affection, just a sort of distant pity. What happened to Melody? Charles flinched. She left me about 6 months after we got to Denver. Ran off with a gambler, took most of my money with her. Florence should have felt vindicated, but she just felt sad. Sad for all the wasted years, for all the pain that could have been avoided. I'm sorry that happened to you, I truly am. But Charles, you need to understand something. I don't forgive you because what you did was forgivable. I forgive you because I don't want to carry the anger anymore. I have a good life now, a better life than I ever had with you. So thank you, in a way. If you hadn't left, I never would have found Samuel. You always were stronger than me, Charles said quietly. I see that now. Goodbye, Charles. Florence walked away and didn't look back. She climbed into her wagon and drove home to the ranch, to her husband and her son, to the life she had built from the ashes of her old one. When she got home, Samuel was in the yard with Thomas, teaching him how to rope a fence post. Her heart swelled with love at the sight of them. Samuel looked up and saw her, and the smile on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "How was town?" he called out. "Interesting, I'll tell you about it later." She climbed down from the wagon and walked over to them. Samuel wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her close, dropping a kiss on her temple. Thomas toddled over and hugged her legs. "Mama, I roped the post." "Did you? That's wonderful, sweetheart." That evening, after Thomas was in bed, Florence told Samuel about the encounter with Charles. He listened quietly, then said, "How do you feel?" "Free," Florence said simply. "I feel completely free. That chapter of my life is closed, and I'm at peace with it. All I want now is to focus on our future, on our family, on this life we're building together." "That sounds perfect to me." Samuel pulled her into his arms. "I love you, Florence Irving. I love you more every single day." "I love you too. You saved me, you know. Not because I needed saving, but because you helped me save myself. You showed me I was worth more than I thought I was. You gave me back my confidence, my joy, my hope. You did the same for me. I was going through the motions before I met you, just existing. You made me want to live again. You made everything brighter and better." They stood there holding each other as the sun set, grateful for the unexpected paths that had led them to each other, grateful for second chances and new beginnings. The years that followed were good ones. In 1889, Florence gave birth to another son whom they named Daniel. The pregnancy was even harder than the first, and the doctor advised that it would be dangerous for her to have any more children. Florence and Samuel were content with their 2 boys, pouring all their love and energy into raising them well. Thomas and Daniel were as different as night and day. Thomas was adventurous and outgoing, always climbing trees and exploring creeks, while Daniel was quieter and more thoughtful, preferring books to outdoor adventures. But they adored each other and were rarely apart. The ranch continued to prosper. Samuel proved to be an excellent businessman, and with Florence's keen mind for numbers, they expanded their operation significantly. They built a bigger barn, improved their irrigation system, and increased their cattle herd to over 200 head. They became one of the most successful ranching families in the valley, respected and admired by their neighbors. Florence remained active in the community. She helped establish a school in Jackson, serving on the board and advocating for better educational opportunities for all the valley's children. She organized fundraisers for families in need and became known as someone who would always help a neighbor in trouble. She had transformed from a woman who felt invisible into a pillar of the community, and it filled her with quiet pride. Samuel supported all her endeavors while managing the ranch with skill and dedication. He taught his sons about ranching, about honor, about treating people with respect. He was patient and kind but firm when necessary. He was everything Charles had never been, a true partner in every sense of the word. In 1892, Margaret and her family moved back from California. Her husband Robert had gotten a job managing a bank in Jackson, and they bought a house in town. Florence was overjoyed to have her daughter close again. Margaret now had 3 children, William, Sarah, and baby Robert Jr., and the cousins became inseparable playmates. One afternoon in the summer of 1893, Florence and Margaret were sitting on the porch watching the children play in the yard. Thomas was 9 now, tall and gangly, and he was teaching the younger kids how to skip stones. Daniel, at 4, was trying valiantly to keep up with his older brother. "I love seeing them all together like this," Margaret said. "It's what family should be." "It is," Florence agreed. "I'm so glad you're here, sweetheart. I missed you terribly." "I missed you too. And I have to say, Mama, watching you and Samuel together, it's shown me what marriage should look like. Robert and I have been trying to model our relationship after yours. The way you communicate, the way you support each other, the way you clearly still love each other after all these years. It's inspiring." Florence felt her eyes fill with tears. "That's the loveliest thing you could say to me. It's true. You and Samuel have something special. You can see it in the way he looks at you, in the way you light up when he comes into the room. I'm so grateful that you found him, that you got your happy ending." "Me too," Florence said. "I almost gave up, you know. After your father left, I thought my life was over. I thought I was too old, too used up, too broken to deserve happiness, but Samuel showed me that it's never too late for a new beginning. He showed me that love isn't about age or perfection. It's about finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, and chooses you anyway." That evening, after everyone had gone home and the boys were asleep, Florence and Samuel took a walk around their property. It was a beautiful evening, clear and mild, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. They walked hand in hand, comfortable in the silence. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked eventually. "How different my life is now compared to 10 years ago. How much has changed. All for the better, I hope. Absolutely for the better. I was thinking about something Charles said to me that last day. He told me I should be grateful for the years we had together, that I should remember the good times. But the truth is, I can barely remember any good times with him. It all feels like a gray blur. But with you, every day is vivid and bright. Every moment feels real and important. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense. That's how I feel too. Like my life really started the day I met you. Everything before that was just preparation." Florence stopped walking and turned to face him. Even after all these years, her heart still skipped a beat when she looked at him. "I want you to know something, Samuel. I'm grateful for every single day we have together. I don't take any of it for granted. You gave me a second chance at life, at love, at happiness. You made me believe in myself again. I will never be able to thank you enough for that." Samuel cupped her face in his hands. "You don't need to thank me. Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done. You're the best part of my life, Florence. You and our boys. You're everything I never knew I needed." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, and Florence melted into his embrace. After all these years, his kiss still made her feel young and desired and cherished. They stood there under the emerging stars, 2 people who had found each other when they needed it most, 2 people who had built something beautiful and lasting from the wreckage of past pain. The years continued to roll by, marked by the ordinary miracles of daily life. Birthdays and holidays, good harvests and lean years, skinned knees and childhood illnesses, Sunday dinners and Saturday dances. Thomas grew into a strapping young man, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, with an easy charm that made him popular with everyone. Daniel remained quieter but showed a remarkable talent for drawing and painting, filling sketchbooks with detailed renderings of the landscape and animals around him. In 1899, when Thomas was 15 and Daniel was 10, Wyoming officially became a state. The territory that Florence and Samuel had helped tame and build was now part of the United States of America. There was a big celebration in Jackson with speeches and music and dancing. The whole family attended, dressed in their finest clothes. As Florence watched her sons laughing with their cousins, as she felt Samuel's arm around her waist, as she looked around at the community she had helped build, she felt a profound sense of contentment. This was her legacy. Not the ranch or the cattle or the money, but the family she had created, the lives she had touched, the love she had nurtured. That night, as they were getting ready for bed, Samuel said, "What are you smiling about?" "I was just thinking that I'm 57 years old, and I'm happier now than I've ever been in my life. Isn't that something?" "It's everything." Samuel climbed into bed beside her and pulled her close. "You know what I think? I think Charles Vandermeer did us both a favor. If he hadn't been stupid enough to leave you, we never would have found each other, so maybe we should thank him." Florence laughed. "I suppose you're right, though I doubt he sees it that way." "His loss. He had something precious, and he threw it away. I'll never make that mistake." "I know you won't. You've proved that to me every single day for the last 15 years. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. Two people who had found their way home to each other. Two people who had learned that love has no expiration date, that it's never too late to start over, that sometimes the best chapters of our lives are the ones we never saw coming. In 1902, Thomas announced that he wanted to go to college in Laramie to study agriculture. Florence was proud but heartbroken to see her firstborn leave home. Samuel assured her it was natural, that they had raised him to be independent and ambitious. They sent him off with their blessing and many hugs, and Florence cried for 3 days afterward. But Thomas came home for holidays and summers, full of new ideas and enthusiasm. He talked about modern ranching techniques and scientific approaches to livestock management. Samuel listened with interest and started implementing some of Thomas's suggestions on their ranch. The changes proved successful, increasing their productivity and profits. Daniel, meanwhile, had developed into a talented artist. When he was 13, Florence sent some of his drawings to an art teacher in Denver, who wrote back with high praise and an offer to take Daniel on as a student. It was a difficult decision, but eventually they agreed to let Daniel spend his school year in Denver studying art while living with a respectable family. He would come home for summers to help on the ranch. With both boys gone for much of the year, Florence and Samuel found themselves alone together again, much like in the early days of their relationship. They took advantage of the quiet, spending long evenings talking and reading, taking trips to visit friends and family, rediscovering each other without the demands of active parenting. "It's like we're courting again," Florence said one evening as they danced in their living room to music from the phonograph Samuel had bought her for her birthday. "Except now I get to take you to bed afterward," Samuel replied with a grin. "Samuel Irving, you're terrible." "You love it." She did. She loved everything about their life together. The way he still brought her wildflowers for no reason. The way he listened when she talked about her day. The way he made her feel beautiful and desired even as her hair turned gray and lines appeared around her eyes. The way he was her best friend as well as her lover and husband. In 1905, Thomas graduated from college and came home to work on the ranch. He had grown into a fine young man, responsible and hardworking, with his father's integrity and his mother's sharp mind. He started courting a local girl named Emma Wilson, the daughter of another ranching family, and they were married in the spring of 1906. Florence cried at the wedding, but these were happy tears. Watching Thomas exchange vows with Emma, seeing the love in his eyes, Florence was overwhelmed with gratitude. Her son would have the kind of marriage she had with Samuel, based on mutual respect and genuine affection. He would not repeat the mistakes of her first marriage. Daniel came home for the wedding too, now 17 and studying at an art institute in Chicago. He had become quite successful, selling his paintings to galleries and private collectors. He was tall and lean, with sensitive eyes and an artist's long fingers. He told stories about the city, about the museums and theaters, about the vibrant cultural life. Florence was proud of both her sons for following their passions and becoming good men. In 1907, Thomas and Emma gave Florence and Samuel their first grandchild, a boy they named Samuel after his grandfather. Samuel was beside himself with joy, carrying the baby around and talking to him constantly. Florence watched her husband with their grandson and fell in love with him all over again. "You're going to spoil that child rotten," she told him. "That's what grandfathers are for," Samuel replied, not taking his eyes off the baby. The ranch now spanned over 3,000 acres, one of the largest in the valley. Thomas took over more of the day-to-day operations, allowing Samuel to slow down a bit. At 67, Samuel was still strong and active, but he had earned the right to take things easier. He spent more time with Florence, going on rides through their property, having picnics by the creek, enjoying the fruits of their labor. One summer evening in 1908, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. As they had done countless times over the years, Samuel reached over and took Florence's hand. "Do you remember what I said to you the day after Charles left?" he asked. "You said a lot of things to me that day." "I said he left the better half behind. I want you to know, Florence, that has proved true every single day since. You are the best person I've ever known. You're strong and kind and brave and beautiful. I thank God every day that Charles was fool enough to leave you, because it meant I got to love you. You're my better half, the best part of me, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Florence felt tears streaming down her face. After 24 years of marriage, Samuel could still move her to tears with his words. "I love you too, Samuel. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to keep going. You showed me what real love looks like, what a real partnership looks like. I will be grateful to you for the rest of my life." They sat there holding hands as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Two people who had found each other in the midst of heartbreak and had built something beautiful together. Two people who had proved that love doesn't have an age limit, that second chances are real, that sometimes the best things in life come after the worst. In 1910, Daniel returned home from Chicago with an announcement. He had met a woman, a fellow artist named Victoria Somerset, and they were getting married. She was from a wealthy family back east, and while her parents weren't thrilled about her marrying an artist from Wyoming, they had given their blessing. Daniel brought Victoria to meet his parents, and Florence immediately liked her. She was intelligent and spirited, with a quick laugh and an obvious devotion to Daniel. The wedding was held at the ranch, with guests coming from all over. It was a joyous celebration with music and dancing and abundant food. As Florence watched Daniel and Victoria exchange vows, she reflected on how far her family had come. From the ashes of her failed first marriage had grown this beautiful, thriving family. 2 successful sons, 2 lovely daughters-in-law, and a grandson who was the light of everyone's life. More grandchildren followed. Thomas and Emma had 3 more children, 2 girls and another boy. Daniel and Victoria had twins, a boy and a girl. The ranch house was always full of noise and laughter, with grandchildren running through the rooms and playing in the yard. Florence was in her element, baking cookies and telling stories, teaching the girls to sew and the boys to ride. Samuel built a swing in the big oak tree and spent hours pushing grandchildren higher and higher while they shrieked with delight. Life was full and rich and satisfying. Florence's first marriage felt like something that had happened to a different person in a different lifetime. Sometimes she would think about those years, about the woman she had been, sad and invisible and unloved. She felt compassion for that woman, but she no longer was that woman. She had transformed into someone stronger, someone who knew her own worth, someone who had learned that being left behind was sometimes the best thing that could happen. In the spring of 1915, Florence and Samuel celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, inviting half the valley. There were speeches and toasts, and Thomas read a letter that Margaret had sent from California, where she and Robert had retired. "To my mother and Samuel," Thomas read, his voice thick with emotion, "you have shown all of us what real love looks like. You have built a life together based on respect, partnership, and genuine affection. You have weathered storms and celebrated joys side by side. You have created a family that is loving and supportive and strong. Thank you for being the example we all strive to follow. May you have many more years of happiness together." Florence was crying, and Samuel was blinking rapidly. They looked at each other, and in that glance was a whole conversation. 25 years of shared moments and private jokes and deep understanding. He leaned over and kissed her softly, and their family cheered. That night, lying in bed, Florence said, "Can you believe it's been 25 years?" "Best 25 years of my life," Samuel replied. "Though you've got to stop getting more beautiful. You're going to give me a heart attack." Florence laughed. "I'm 63 years old. I'm not beautiful anymore. You're the most beautiful woman in the world to me, always have been, always will be." It was the simple truth, and Florence knew it. She could see it in his eyes every time he looked at her. She was beautiful to him not because of how she looked, but because of who she was, because of the life they had built together, because of the love that had only grown deeper with time. The years after that were quieter, but no less precious. Florence and Samuel spent their days working on the ranch, though Thomas handled most of the responsibility now. They took care of their grandchildren, hosted family dinners, and simply enjoyed being together. They had the luxury of time now. Time to sit and talk, time to take long rides, time to just be. Samuel's health began to decline slowly in 1918. Nothing dramatic, just the gradual wearing down that comes with age. He was 79 years old, and while his mind was still sharp, his body was betraying him. Florence watched with concern as he moved slower, tired more easily, struggled with tasks that had once been effortless. In the fall of 1919, Samuel had a minor heart episode. The doctor ordered him to take it easy to avoid stress and heavy work. Samuel complied reluctantly, frustrated by his body's limitations. Florence stayed by his side, reading to him, talking with him, making sure he rested. One evening, as they sat together on the porch wrapped in blankets, Samuel said, "I'm sorry, Florence." "For what?" "For getting old. For not being able to do the things I used to do. For being a burden." Florence turned to him, indignant. "Samuel Irving, don't you dare apologize for being human. You're not a burden. You're my husband, my partner, my love. Taking care of you isn't a burden, it's a privilege. You took care of me when I needed it. Now I get to return the favor." "I don't want to leave you," he whispered. "Then don't. Stay with me as long as you can." He did. Samuel rallied and had several more good years. Years when he got to see his grandchildren grow, when he got to hold his great-grandchildren, when he got to sit on the porch with Florence and reminisce about all their years together. They were precious years, bittersweet because they both knew time was running out, but precious nonetheless. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night in 1923. He was 83 years old. Florence was holding his hand when he took his last breath, and she felt a piece of her soul go with him. The funeral was huge. It seemed like everyone in the valley came to pay their respects to Samuel Irving, the man who had been a pillar of the community, a devoted husband and father, and a true friend to so many. People told stories about his kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength. Florence listened to them all, grateful that others had seen in Samuel what she had seen, that his goodness had touched so many lives. After the funeral, after everyone had gone home, Florence sat alone in the house that had been their sanctuary. She felt hollowed out, lost without him. For 38 years, Samuel had been her constant. He had been her support, her lover, her best friend. She didn't know how to be in the world without him, but she was not alone for long. Her children and grandchildren rallied around her, making sure she was never left by herself for too long, making sure she knew she was loved and valued. Thomas moved back into the main house with his family, insisting that Florence shouldn't be alone. At first, Florence resisted, wanting her independence, but eventually she was grateful for the company, for the noise and chaos of a full house. She lived for 12 more years after Samuel died, years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with continued involvement in the community, with the satisfaction of watching her family thrive. She never remarried. She had had her great love and nothing could compare to what she had shared with Samuel. Florence passed away in her sleep in April of 1935 at the age of 83. She died in the bed she had shared with Samuel, in the house they had made a home, surrounded by family who loved her. Her last thoughts were of Samuel, of the day he had ridden up to her ranch and offered to help, of the moment he had told her that Charles had left the better half behind. She had been so broken then, so convinced she had nothing left to offer. But Samuel had seen something in her that she hadn't seen in herself. He had seen strength and grace and beauty. He had seen a woman worth loving, worth cherishing, worth building a life with. And in loving her, he had helped her see herself that way too. At her funeral, Thomas stood up to speak. His hair was gray now, and he had the weathered look of a man who had spent his life working the land. But his voice was strong and clear as he told the story of his mother and father, of how they had found each other when they both needed it most, of how they had built something beautiful from the ashes of pain and loss. "My mother taught me that it's never too late for a second chance," Thomas said. "She taught me that being left behind can be the beginning of something better. She taught me that real love isn't about perfection or youth or convenience. It's about finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, and chooses you anyway. She and my father had that kind of love, and they showed all of us what a marriage should be. I'm grateful every day that they found each other, and I hope that when my time comes, I will have lived up to the example they set." Florence was buried next to Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The grave markers were simple but elegant, with their names and dates and a single line of inscription that Florence had chosen years before. He left the better half behind, and the better half found something better. It was the truth. Florence had been left behind, discarded, and dismissed, but in being left, she had found herself. She had discovered her own strength, her own worth, her own capacity for joy. And she had found Samuel, the man who had loved her not in spite of her age or her past, but because of everything she was. Their story became part of the family lore, told and retold to children and grandchildren. It became a story about resilience, about second chances, about love that defies expectations. It became a story that reminded people that life doesn't end at 40 or 50 or 60. That romance and passion and new beginnings are possible at any age, that sometimes the best chapter of your life is the one you never saw coming. And in Jackson, Wyoming, on that ranch that Florence and Samuel built together, their descendants still work the land, still gather for Sunday dinners, still tell the story of the woman who was left behind and the cowboy who saw the treasure that had been discarded. They tell it as a reminder that sometimes what feels like an ending is really just a beginning. That sometimes the best things in life come after the worst, that love. Real love is always worth fighting for, worth believing in, worth celebrating. Florence Vandermeer Irving had been many things in her life. A wife, a mother, a grandmother, a rancher, a businesswoman, a community leader. But most importantly, she had been a woman who refused to let someone else's rejection define her worth. She had been a woman who found the courage to start over, to open her heart again, to believe in the possibility of happiness. And in doing so, she had lived a life that was full and rich and meaningful, a life that touched countless others, a life that mattered. The better half had indeed been left behind. But the better half had gone on to create something extraordinary, and that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.